to be your mistress of ceremonies for this evening. My name is Sanya Allen, and I am supporting the SKN 100 project. I would like to just quickly establish the order of protocol. So I would like to recognize the Honorable Mr. Conris Maynard, Minister of Public Infrastructure, Energy and Utilities, the Honorable Dr. Joel Clark, Minister of Sustainable Development and Environment, Climate Action and Constituency Empowerment, the Honorable Mr. Mark Brantley, Premier of Nevis, Ms. Sonia Parry, Vice President of the St. Kitts and Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce, distinguished guests, representatives of government agencies, regional bodies, members of the business community, representatives of the utility companies, development partners, members of civil society, academia, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's Energy Leadership Forum Mixer. Thank you for joining us as we engage in this arguably most important national conversation taking place in St. Kitts and Nevis today. The future of our energy sector and its role in supporting sustainable national development is quite paramount. Tonight's gathering brings together a diverse group of stakeholders, united by a common interest in ensuring that our federation develops an energy system that is secure, resilient, affordable, and sustainable. We have three objectives tonight. First, to introduce and discuss the draft National Energy Policy of 2035 and the proposed Federal Energy Commission framework. Secondly, to hear the perspectives from stakeholders across government, business, civil society, academia, utilities, and development partners. Thirdly, to generate practical recommendations that can strengthen these frameworks as they move forward towards implementation. The transition to renewable energy is much more than technology infrastructure. It is about economic resilience, innovation, competitiveness, climate action, and ultimately improving the lives of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Your participation this evening is therefore invaluable. Thank you once again for joining us. So to officially once again welcome us, but more so to introduce the SKN 100 project for the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, I would like to invite Ms. Charlene Bodley to the podium. Thank you very much. And just to quickly acknowledge the presence of the Premier of Nevis, Mr. Mark Brantley, and Deputy. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you, Sanya. Good evening, everyone. So lovely to see everyone here tonight. It's been a long process of us working on our national energy policy under the SKN 100 project. I think Sanya was a little modest, so I just want to say who she is. Sanya is our regulatory and legal advisor under the SKN 100 project, and I much like to refer to her as an honorary Kittitian and Nevisian because Sanya is the former director of the Chamber of Commerce here in St. Kitts and very quickly has understood the context and embraced this beautiful federation. SKN 100 is intended to accelerate the decarbonization of the energy sector in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I did stress and Nevis because this project is intent on including both islands under one federation and to ensure that we take into account the strengths and needs of both islands. The project is it's based on four major components, the first being policy and institutional strengthening as an enabling factor to this energy transition. The second I'm quite excited about. It is where we show and tell, the demonstration bit of the project, where we will be retrofitting 5 public buildings across the Federation with energy efficiency and renewable energy measures. The third component is where we scale up. Having demonstrated, we scale up and we focus a bit on the financial sector and enabling financial institutions to be part of the energy transition. And as with any other great project, component 4 focuses on monitoring and evaluation. So we have been accelerating and moving very quickly and diligently through component 1, which is a focus on policy and regulation. And so over the last almost 2 months, we have been engaging key stakeholders across the Federation as we develop the national energy policy. And as you can tell, and we're gathered here today because stakeholder engagement is extremely important to us. And so I do invite you to be candid and to participate in the discussions as we go through. I won't say too much for now because this is not about the entire SKN 100 project, but as we go along, you will hear a little more about the national energy policy. So with that, again, thank you for coming and welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Bodley. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now moving into the first substantive session for the evening. As St. Kitts and Nevis advances its sustainable island state agenda and pursues an ambitious energy transition, energy efficiency must be viewed as a cornerstone of national development. This evening's fireside chat will explore the important role of the Ministry of Environment, Climate Action, and Constituency Empowerment in advancing these objectives and creating the enabling environment for long-term sustainability. We are honored to be joined by the Honorable Dr. Joel Clark, Minister of Sustainable Development, ETAL, and facilitating this evening's discussion will be Ms. Sharon Raton, consultant supporting the Sustainable Island State Agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Minister Clark and Ms. Raton.
Good evening, everyone. Let me first acknowledge and thank you for being here. That we know time is a precious commodity, and we deeply appreciate that you chose to be here with us this evening. With all protocols established, I would proceed quickly, as time again is of the essence, but to let you know that the honorable ministers and all the technical personnel who are here with us in the persons of, let me point out some of them, SCALEC CEO, I see Ms. Pearl Williams, some of the members of the board, the staff, our energy unit, and the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, local and visiting consultants. And we have here with us our special group, Ms. Mary Nurse and her team. Thank you for being here with us this evening. I want you to know that these people have been not just visible in their offices, but working their minds and really trying for us to tailor the best way forward for us to drive a climate resilience and sustainability agenda. As we pursue our ambition to become a sustainable island state, by 2040, one of the most transformative pillars identified is that of energy. We are learning a lot more about energy beyond electrical generation, and our lens has now become more holistic and focuses on the quality of life. And this evening, I am happy Minister Clark is joining me here and giving us the opportunity to look at the Global Environment Facility-sponsored SKN 100 energy project in St. Kitts. And we're going to delve more into what the connection is with the Sustainable Island State Agenda and unpack the important issues. So one of the first things I would like to share with us is what really is the involvement of your ministry, Sustainable Development, and the Ministry of Environment, ETAL, in this project.
Thank you so much, Ms. Raton. And let me just establish a disclaimer here. We're not doing this fireside because I have anything extra special to say, but because I have a time limit. I have a presentation to some university students at 6:30, so I have to leave early. So please pardon my early departure. But the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Sustainable Development have been leading on the Sustainable Island State agenda for St. Kitts and Nevis. And one of the key roles or key parts of the CISA agenda is energy security. And if you have listened to the Minister of Energy, you would hear him saying over and over that if we solve energy, we're going to solve 3 other critical challenges that St. Kitts and Nevis faces. Importantly, the Ministry of Environment, because we host the Global Environmental Facility, or we're the focal point, we were able to secure this funding for the SKN 100 project. So that's really our institutional role in this project, but it's also a recognition that environment and climate resilience has so much to do with energy security. So we continue to play a supportive and role with the Ministry of Energy, with SCELEC, NEVLEC, and all our partners in ensuring that St. Kitts and Nevis can achieve sustainability targets through adequate funding.
Yes, apart from the funding, Minister also has to, let me remind her about our international climate commitments. And this is why her department, Climate Action, is leading this charge with the Ministry of Environment under Minister Maynard's portfolio. Now, what is your understanding of what we're trying to achieve with the SKN 100 project?
Right. And what I should have also mentioned is that for climate resilience, it's primarily about weaning ourselves from fossil fuels. And this project, the primary purpose of the SKN 100 project, as mentioned earlier, we are looking, one, at the practical implications, like what does it mean for the government's energy bill if we can solarize key institutions? So we really do look forward to that particular part of the project, but importantly, it's also the policies, and we've all had the benefit of at least hearing and reviewing the critical projects that would come out of it, the energy policy, and how that, the implications for that in terms of our own resilience agenda, our energy transition, and the energy economy that we're trying to foster between St. Kitts and Nevis in particular.
Thank you, Minister. I think I'm hearing you also hint to the energy efficient methods. The SKN 100 project is also complementary to the renewable energy transition. And could you give me some practical ways in which you see some, or examples of energy efficient methods that we can adopt, or what the project is hinting to so far?
I'll get to the energy efficient methods after, but I want to stress here the importance of the opportunity for, let's say, innovative financing and partnership with SCELEC and NEVLEC to move beyond just being energy suppliers to part of the financing options for our own energy transition. Now, if we, and this really is a question for the technocrats, so I'm not going to present myself here technically, so please forgive me. But we have often said that we have to make the green transition, we have to make solarizing our homes, solarizing our schools, cooling our schools, not just effective, but actually attainable. And for us, for the Ministry of Environment, we can't keep preaching. We need to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels without providing practical ways in which a household can be solarized and it doesn't increase the cost at the front end, or how our schools can become cool without increasing the cost to the Ministry of Education. And that's what I hope even this particular energy mixer would generate ideas for us in terms of how we get practical applications at the community level, at the school level, at the household level, and ideas for how government can make it cost effective. So very mindful not to say we can do A, B, C, D, which are options that the technocrats can provide, but how do we finance this? And that's why I'm happy to see the private sector here, because it's how do we de-risk investment for the private sector, for the chamber, for the banks who are here, so that they can come on board as partners with the government to ensure that we can actually solarize beyond the 5 public buildings that the SKN 100 project is going to solarize, but actually expand to all public buildings across the Federation.
Yes. So you mentioned the public buildings that will be solarized. This is one activity in the SKN1 project that would help us to see how that transition could be made, and also bring attention to persons' behavior in how they treat with energy efficient means. And then we'll see how that spreads to the rest of St. Kitts and Nevis. So we'll know what steps that we can take. I want to ask the Minister what excites you most about this project.
But truthfully, it's the resources. It's recognizing that there is an opportunity in what we call the energy sector. Or solar plant and all the other options that we're putting on the table for St. Kitts and Nevis. The opportunity for cost savings, that's very exciting for me, because I'm always about how does this impact livelihoods? How does this impact those bottom dollar, the bills that they have? How does it impact people's experience here in St. Kitts and Nevis? So that's most exciting, the potential for St. Kitts and Nevis to not just reduce cost for households, for institutions, and not just reach our NDC goals of reducing reliance on fossil fuels by 60% by 2040. But really, what does it mean for the average Kittitian and Nevisian when we're here and we don't have high Nevlec and Skellig bills, and nobody's upset because Nevlec and Skellig is cutting the bill, but you can afford your bill. So for me, that's the opportunity that's most exciting.
Thank you, Minister. And think these are considerations for the second panel. Energy efficiency has to be part of our national culture. Do you agree? Yes. And we have to begin actively managing our energy use. Those are some of the benefits, because we have to help to engender the environmental stewardship, our behaviors in our choices of using energy on a daily basis. Certainly, we hope, can I say in the next 5 years, that we can reduce our dependence on fossil fuels?
In 2 years.
Oh, in 2 years. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We look forward to a robust discussion. Minister has committed to 2 years.
No, I'm committing on behalf of the Minister of Energy.
On behalf of the Minister of Energy. But the whole march is towards greater energy security and renewable energy that would help to share the electricity supply in concert with reduced energy efficient behaviors, energy efficient strategies or policies that would help us. And in the upcoming panel, we are going to look closer at the national energy policy that we now have. We have moved quite a way. The last one prior to that, I think, there was a draft one in 2014, and we have moved taken some steps ahead. And one of the exciting things is the Federal Energy Commission, because we recognize that this cannot be done. Any changes in the way we view the use of energy, and if we are going to make any advancements, we cannot work in the same way. So we have to work more together. And we conclude on this note, and we hope this would frame your questions or comments for the next upcoming panel. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rattan. Earlier this afternoon, I was not able to properly acknowledge the presence of the Honorable Mr. Spencer Brand, Minister of Communication, Public Works and ATAL from Nevis Island Administration, as well as other members of the Nevis Island Administration. So I wish to do so at this point in time. Thank you for joining us. So we now turn our attention to two of the central initiatives, as Ms. Ratan has just indicated, which is the draft National Energy Policy, as well as the framework for the Federal Energy Efficiency Commission. And I would like to invite at this point in time my colleague, Mr. Dylan Clark, the energy policy and regulatory expert. Mr. Clark, can you join us?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. All protocols observed. Now, the national energy policy begins with a simple reality. St. Kitts and Nevis face a number of interconnected challenges, such as high energy costs, exposure to volatile fuel prices, extreme weather conditions, small system constraints, as well as growing demands on both infrastructure and the economy. These challenges affect every household, every business, every sector. Fossil fuels account for roughly 98% of all electricity generation in the Federation, with imports at 5.2% of GDP. This is a considerable drain on both fiscal space and foreign currency reserves, while emissions erode environmental sustainability. It is thus a moral imperative to address these constraints to broad-based economic growth and inclusive development. This is why the national energy policy should not be viewed simply as a response to climate change. It is an economic and industrial strategy. Energy influences the cost of doing business. It affects tourism, agriculture, transport, water, digital services, and investment competitiveness. When we improve our energy system, we improve the very foundation upon which the entire economy operates. Thus, the national energy policy is therefore intended to provide a clear roadmap for achieving a more affordable, secure, resilient, and sustainable energy future for St. Kitts and Nevis. But policies alone do not deliver outcomes. They require clear rules, strong institutions, and effective coordination. Of course, you know what context the Federation operates under, and this becomes even more essential for achieving these goals. Simply put, the new commission helps establish the rules of the game. It provides the institutional framework to coordinate action, guide implementation, support investment, monitor progress, and ensure national energy objectives are translated into real results. Now, as we move forward, success will depend on partnerships with governments, utilities, businesses, investors, communities, and citizens who all have a role to play in this transition. Now, tonight, in this opportunity, we have to continue conversation to help shape the energy future and determine what type of energy future we want to leave for the next generation. And I want to encourage as much feedback and engagement as possible, because only through stakeholder engagement and consultation can we really refine and shape a very effective policy framework and help our political machinery shape the very legislative framework upon which that policy has to sit upon. So once again, everyone, I want to take time on behalf of my colleagues to thank all stakeholders who have been working with us for the past 3+ months on getting to this point now where we will encourage, again, more open and honest consultations, especially with the private sector and other very important elements of society, like civil society, various vulnerable groups, and so on. Thank you, everyone.
I was now telling my colleague here, don't run away so quickly. It's not that easy. So what I'd just like to indicate is that you can scan the QR code and you would be able to access the policy instruments. We're inviting everyone in this room to please go through the documentation and send in their comments. We're going to extend the comment period for an additional week so that we can get feedback from the private sector on the policy. And at this point in time, I have my good friend here who's going to answer any questions, comments, or concerns that you may have at this point in time. So feel free to pose any questions. The floor is open. Don't be shy. I know that there are burning questions that are in this room. Yes, we have one question.
Yes, good evening to the entire room. My name is Lorenzo Jackson, the Vice President of the St. Kitts Nevis Association of Persons with Disabilities. And my question is, with this policy, for instance, if I needed assistance from NHC to build a home, would this policy affect it in a way? For instance, I wanted my home to be totally green with no utilization of the power grid, or would it have to be like 50-50? I would be able to use solar energy, but also have to utilize the national power grid.
All right, that there is a very great question. And one of the key elements of this national energy policy is the inclusivity element of it, where both policymakers and regulators will actively engage vulnerable groups of society, such as yourself, just to ensure that in this transition, no stakeholder is left behind, right? Because one of the key underlying theme of this entire endeavor is to have a just transition. And that means equal opportunity, regardless of stakeholder background. Now, being able to be identified in initial stakeholder mappings is going to be a key part of this engagement. And this is where advocacy groups come into play, being able to help policymakers identify who in society needs help immediately and what type of help, right, can help with more targeted interventions. So yes, and I'm going to advocate for more than 50-50 for you.
Do we have any other questions? I see another question.
Good afternoon. I want to ask a number of questions, but I'm not going to be able to ask all the questions I want to ask. So I'm going to ask, first of all, who would have been exposed to this policy document, right? Because I hope it's not just the people in the room here, because this is going to hopefully impact the whole country. That's the first question. The second one has to do with whether or not the policy includes some kind of strategy to make sure that we're going to have a successful outcome. And let me put that in some context. I'm old enough to remember 1975. I don't know I believe the energy people, even if they're not as old as me, should at least know what happened in 1975. We had an energy crisis. And it was because of conflict in the Middle East, just like we're having now. At that time, we had to turn off lights. I could remember there was serious load shedding in Bastille because everything depended on fuel from the Middle East. Cars had to park up, couldn't drive them because gasoline is scarce. I remember lines coming out of the gas stations. That's 1975. That's 25 plus 26, that's 51 years ago. And the reason why I asked whether or not the policy has some strategy to make sure that this thing happens 50 years ago, we're still in the same condition. The identical. You just said that we need 98% of our electricity comes from fossil fuel. So how is this going to change? Is there a real strategy to make sure that 50 years from now, in the year 2050, my maths are correct? 76, thanks for the correction, Minister, right? In the year 2076, are we going to be in the same condition? I'm going to leave my questions there for now, but that is what on my mind with respect to this policy, not necessarily the technical nitty-gritty.
All right. Now, those questions are extremely relevant again. But first, I want to address the engagement strategy. Our approach is to escalate the reach of this stakeholder engagement process. So yes, when it comes to the originating government agencies, doing the stakeholder mapping across dependent and interdependent institutions, that has been done. Now engaging both civil society as well as yeah. Now engaging civil society as well as the business community is another phase of this engagement strategy because all of us are energy end users, right? As well as energy is a key input when it comes to the business and investment considerations. So being able to share a structured feedback from your perspectives will help balance any sort of implicit design biases because the system is only good as the end users are able to interface with it. Now, the 1975 oil shock that you mentioned is the exact same situation in which we find ourselves in right now. And this decarbonization strategy is how we mitigate those type of severity. By targeting 100% RE for electricity generation, you're immediately removing that dependence on imported fossil fuels to support the economy. And by doing that, you're cutting emissions by 61% over time. Now, with an electrified grid, you can then further decarbonize transportation. The introduction of the EV strategies. We have the geothermal strategy that's underway, that's advancing, as well as recent procurements in solar and wind. Those are active strategies. Now, what the NEP does, it converges, it enhances coordination, transparency, and reporting. The FEC also helps to reinforce that by institutionalizing that change. And of course, making the rules of the game more investor-friendly by removing any sort of information asymmetry that impact the quality of investments and the scale of them, as well as greater consumer oversight and protections. So the strategy is in motion, but the policy and the commission is how we coordinate at a greater level of effect.
I think important to add as well, there are complementary initiatives that are also taking place. So while the policy gives us that broad base, a follow-up with an implementation plan. What technologies do you look at? What is I like to focus on the least regrets as opposed to your least cost mix of technologies among all of your renewable energy technologies. How much do you focus on energy efficiency? What is the investment that is attached to that ideal mix of technologies? How do you incorporate climate vulnerability? And we're all excited about solar, but I cannot help but remember just in my last job, I worked for RMI, Rocky Mountain Institute, and we would have supported St. Vincent and the Grenadines with a solar farm. And less than 1 year later, we lost 70% of that solar farm to Hurricane Beryl. And so I am absolutely excited about renewable energy technologies by nature. But how do we do it? How do we implement in a way that leaves us not more vulnerable than if we didn't pursue renewable energy. So we do have an ongoing project, and I recognize the presence of one of the project team members here, GTI, and that was launched maybe 2 weeks ago, and they will be leading that strategy. The project, SKN 100, in addition to the policy, will also deliver an implementation roadmap for the policy. And I have to agree with my colleague that the establishment of an independent regulatory body for the energy sector is critical to making that happen.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? Yes, we have one more question. We have two more questions. It's getting exciting in here now. So yeah, we will have to just take these two questions and then we would move swiftly on to our panel discussion.
A pleasant good afternoon, everyone. I am from the St. Kitts Nevis Association of Persons with Disabilities. I have a few questions and one comment. Where can I find this policy? And also, will this be a part of the Sustainable Development Goal initiative that the government has launched? And also, based on what is happening at the moment with the oil crisis, I would like to ask the government, why is it that our electricity bills are so high for let's say a 2-bedroom household, and the electricity bill is about $300 and something? So that it will be my question. I thank you.
All right. Again, very important questions. First off, if you scan the QR code, right, so the National Energy Policy and associated documents will be provided in all forms that will accommodate various groups of society that are impaired or differently able. Yes. Yeah. Yes. The text-to-speech. Yeah. Yeah, so one can be made available. It's basically the audio version of the policy by just a text-to-speech conversion. Yeah, that can be made available. Also, to the other question regarding fuel prices and the ultimate transmission of those costs to households. And again, because 98% of electricity comes from fossil fuel generation, it means that St. Kitts and Nevis and energy independence depends on foreign sources. So whenever there are disruptions in global supply, be it global conflict or other supply chain disruptions, the transmission effect is almost instantaneous. In some cases, the government, through pricing strategies, subsidies, and so on, are able to cushion those initial shocks, but it comes at a cost. And there's only a certain duration in which those shocks can be cushioned. Now, when those buffers are eroded, it puts the economy and the macro stability of the country at risk. So hard decisions are made. And in some cases, the ripple effects do transmit to other sections of the economy. So again, this is why it's a moral imperative to decarbonize as fast as possible, and using this unique opportunity where economic stability and prosperity is coupled with environmental stewardship and sustainability. So,
okay, I understand what you are saying. Also, I am wondering if the government can do something in terms of like No, that was the wrong question. Okay. Is it safe to say that you can turn off all devices, electronics, such as like the fridge, before you leave, and then turn off the main switch to cut costs, or it will have a ripple effect on your circuit breaker?
That's a great question. And I'm seeing Skellig and Nevlik in the room. Right? So it comes back to energy efficiency standards and as well as grid monetization that brings forth raw stability. So in essence, if you're able to implement more energy efficiency appliances and or the finance strategy for consumers to transition to more energy efficient appliances, it creates a savings effect, right? And once it also allows for new initiatives such as net billing. And I do want to talk about the iOS model and tee up Charlene for this.
Okay. So what I would say at this point in time is we have some very good questions. I know there's someone in the back that wanted to ask a question. I'm just going to ask you to hold that question for the next panel as we go swiftly into it. And I just want to add two little things. One, yes, it is indeed tied to the SDG goals. So thank you for pointing that out. Feel free to speak to our technical persons, the utilities companies. They are here and they are open and ready and willing to answer any of those very difficult technical questions. So with that, going after. So as we move on to the next panel, we just wish to indicate that this discussion is going to be focused on building strong institutions, effective partnerships, sound policy frameworks, and investor confidence, which are all essential components of this particular framework. At this point in time, I just wish to welcome the Honorable Mr. Conris Maynard, Minister of Public Infrastructure, Energy, and Utilities, to join us, as well as the Honorable Mark Brandley, Premier of Nevis, and Ms. Sonia Parry, Vice President of the St. Kitts and Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Moderating this session would be Ms. Charlene Bodley, Chief Technical Advisor of the Caribbean Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency. So please join me in welcoming our panel. Thank you so much.
All right, what a powerful discussion this promises to be just by looking at the composition of the panel here today. This week, we spent quite a bit of time interacting with technical experts, the utilities, government representatives, and other stakeholders to validate our start to the national energy policy, as well as a concept note and framework of the Federal Energy Commission. And it sounds like a fancy word, but it really is a regulatory body or a regulator. One thing I think became really clear as we've gone through this process, that the conversation is no longer whether we should transition. And I think that came out really clear when Mr. Maynard posed his provocative question: how do we do this? And how do we do it now? So as we went through our consultations, we are sure that the question is how we transition successfully and how do we ensure that every citizen of the Federation benefits. Tonight's discussion is therefore anchored in the policy, but not so much on the technical side, about the leadership, partnerships, and shared vision that is needed to turn the national energy policy into reality. Our MC has acknowledged our protocol, and I established that protocol. Joining me is Honorable Premier Brantley, Honorable Minister Maynard, and Ms. Sonia Parry, representing the private sector. I will start with a question posed to Minister Maynard, and that is with the intention of setting the national vision and to spur that discussion among us all. Minister, the national energy policy obviously sets very ambitious targets. We were first tasked with delivering an energy policy for 2030, but we have decided to be a little more realistic, yet still ambitious. And the national energy policy is now looking to 2035. Looking beyond the document itself, what does success look like for St. Kitts and Nevis 10 years from now if we were to get this transition right?
Thank you very much, Ms. Bodley, and a pleasant good evening to everyone. It is my pleasure to be here with this mix-up. Please allow me to acknowledge the presence of Premier Brantley, Minister Brands, my colleague, Honorable Dr. Joel Clark, members of the government, stakeholders, and of course, from the business community represented here by Ms. Parry. Pleasant good evening to all. So what does success look like? But before I get there, I am moved to respond to a question I heard earlier that can provide some perspective. There was a question from the audience talking about the situation in 1975. And how do we know that we're not in the same situation? I wanted to add two things to the answers that I heard previously, which I think can guide the response that I will give to your question. One, a political will. It is very important to underscore how very important that is in the context of everything that we're doing. I sit at a panel right now with Premier Brantley, for instance, who sits on the opposition side of the parliament. But there is one issue that we are firmly united on, if not other things. Of course, I'm still working to get him on my side of things, but that's another discussion. But there's one thing that we are united on, in that we must have the development of geothermal on the island of Nevis, and that every federal available resource must be directed towards that success. That is political will in the circumstance, but it can have an expiry date, and we must always be aware of that. So political will is one of them. If I am to expand further on political will to the question that was asked, political will also comes with leadership, that you have persons in those political positions who have the vision to determine that renewable energy is a must. And for instance, someone like myself with a background in electrical computer engineering, who before entering into politics sang about these issues, it is not only because of policy I'm doing this, it's because of a firm belief that I am pushing where I can right now to see these things come to fruition. That's the one thing I would add. The other thing that's very important as well, 51 years ago in 1975, the options were really limited to be able to do anything at the time. Solar technology was not advanced, it was not widely scalable for a country like ours. Geothermal existed in very remote and very limited places around the globe. Even wind development, there were very limited options. And if I am to use another example of, let's say, medicine, in 1900, in 1850, if you attracted certain diseases, you were bound to die. But we have now had an advancement in technology that allows us that even if you get something that 50 years ago, 100 years ago, condemned you to death, you now have a chance to survive. So we have to take the opportunity that we have now, that this technology is now at our doorstep, and make the best use of it. So now, what does success look like for St. Kitts and Nevis? I see a St. Kitts and Nevis in 10 years that is fully independent when it comes to energy. that geothermal is largely developed. St. Kitts and Nevis is interconnected with one grid, connected through the Narrows by underground cables, that there are developed and successful solar energy plants on both islands with battery energy storage, that there is a regulator that is shielded from political interference and that survives politics, and that we have turned energy from something that we just use as a commodity into a sector where we're using it to drive industry, where we're using it to drive our economy by the potential of interconnecting to other islands, whether it is directly by undersea or by providing services like power to X services, green molecules, and these kind of things that we can actually export the energy that we produce. So that is the vision that I have. And I know that's a vision that is shared across the administration, and hence why this remains a key pillar of our sustainable island state agenda.
Folks, you heard it. The government of St. Kitts' vision for 2035 and the energy transition. Yes, on Tuesday, we sat in a room with roughly 25 government reps. And in our very last interactive exercise, the task was to state what is the greatest risk. They did it individually, not in a group. What is the greatest risk that you foresee that could impede this energy transition and therefore the implementation of the national energy policy? And out of the 25, 23 said political will. And so that is in keeping with what we're hearing from Minister. Political will is a key ingredient. And we know the Federation is pursuing a 50 megawatt solar with 30.5 megawatt hour battery system. And that is grand in the context of the Caribbean. I would dare to say that St. Kitts and Nevis is emerging for me as the most ambitious island in the Caribbean where the energy transition uh, is concerned. You also had the launch of your Solarize program that ensures that the average citizen can participate formally in this energy transition by having solar installed on their properties. And you had Drive, which is an electric vehicle transition policy. Minister, last question for now is how do these ongoing national initiatives have the potential to fundamentally reshape the Federation's future? And how do we unite that with the national energy policy?
Thank you very much. It's a good question. Basically, how does the energy policy facilitate all of these things happening at once, and how will it impact our future? I wanted to draw a similarity in another field. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this small European country. I think to 30 years ago, well, more than that, maybe in the 80s, early 90s, they embarked. They were very small, one of the smallest in the region, and they had to find a way to sort of exist with all that was happening around with the Soviet Union and all sorts of different things happening geopolitically. And one of the ways they thought to do it was to make themselves or their government very smart. And they started developing digital solutions for just the way of life. When they started, however, it was done largely in silos. And eventually, they realized that they had to bring all of this thing together. So, yes, they were doing this digitally here, this digitally there, this digitally here. But they had to all interconnect them. And so they strategized and had a vision. One, instead of having to redo everything, why not develop a platform that allows for all of these things to operate at the same time and achieve the same goal? And so Estonia developed a platform known as X-Roads, if anyone is familiar, which meant that they had a vision that the country must be completely digital, services must be instantaneous, but they needed a way to achieve it. And so they developed X roads that can communicate with all of these different things, and they became an example of the entire world. Our energy policy here should almost operate like an X roads. We are already doing a couple of things. Geothermal is advancing. You have solar. We're developing policies. We have to do frameworks. We have to look at wind, etc. How do we get something that acknowledging the advancements in those things, putting a framework together so that create effectively an energy X roads? And that's how I see national policy. It's going to establish the roadmap. It's going to understand what our capacities and limitations are. And instead of scrapping everything and getting rid of it and trying to do this perfect system, use an energy policy to glue everything together and create a roadmap. And what does success looks like in terms of what the impact it's going to have on us is a reality. The young lady asked a question about the cost of electricity. Right now, of course, we are completely dependent on imported fossil fuels. We do not have any control over the price of fossil fuel. But right now, it is costing Skelec more money to buy fuel than they can charge their customers electricity for a tariff on the electricity. That is insane. So if Skelec can raise $8 million from services, they have to pay $12 million in fuel, as an example. That's not sustainable. But what this transition allows is to get rid of that fuel bill, such that now that expense that somebody has to absorb, the government right now is absorbing a significant amount of that on the residential side. The business community has a very heavy burden to take right now because, as we've said, we have no control over this, but somebody has to absorb that. That amounts to hundreds of millions of dollars every year. An energy transition effectively means that you could cut that significantly, such that those resources, which obviously exist in the country because we're paying them, we have to pay them. So those resources exist. It means almost instantaneously you can have access to hundreds of millions of dollars in the economy to be able to do other things. The 50 megawatt plant that we're talking about, technically, that could possibly give 40 to 50% of the energy we need on the island of St. Kitts alone. If our fuel bill is $120 million in a year, that is $60 million available at the time that that plant goes online. So that is the real impact that you can have on the entire economy, getting rid of that fuel bill.
Thank you, Minister. And the policy and sustainability as well. And you've mentioned geothermal development. Honorable Minister Mark Brantley. So today, a vision said to me, geothermal is our resource. It does not belong to the Federation. I think he was half joking, but somewhere in there, I think he was a little serious. Now, we heard Minister Maynard's shared vision for the Federation, and certainly the national energy policy is based in that two island, one federation. Delivering that vision, therefore, will require very strong leadership and close collaboration across both St. Kitts and Nevis. Now, throughout your own leadership, you have championed sustainable development and renewable energy in Nevis and the Federation, helping to position the island as a very important contributor to the Federation's energy transition. Now, across the Caribbean, we have a lot of skepticism around geothermal. And I have maintained that once Dominica does it and St. Kitts and Nevis does it, then the rest of the region is fine and dandy because we would have proven that it can happen. And so, Minister Brantley, my question to you is, from your perspective, how do we translate this shared national vision into coordinated action that respects the unique strengths of the two islands while ensuring that the benefits of the energy transition are realized across the entire federation?
Am I? Yes. So thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I was invited to a fireside chat, so I imagine we would have had a fire, but I'm nevertheless grateful. Now, my brother Conway spoke about political will, and just to demonstrate that I am trying to work on this particular project, I wore a red tie so that he could feel comfortable, because I think that was important to him. So just so you know, but it goes no further than the tie. So let me make that very clear. Uh, I want to say, you raised a question about ownership of geothermal. And I think that's the wrong question. And I don't want us to get bogged down talking about ownership. I think what we need to be talking about is how do we collaborate to bring the benefit of geothermal to everybody. And I think that for the very first time in St. Kitts and Nevis, we have the political will on both sides of the Narrows to make that a reality. So my recollection was that it was in November of 2023 that the National Assembly passed a resolution which committed the country, the nation of St. Kitts and Nevis, to put in the resources behind this particular development. Truth be told, the geothermal effort in Nevis started way back in, I think it was 2004. So it's been about 22 years since we've been trying to realize this resource for the benefit of our people. And if we were to do the math, Minister Maynard spoke about how much money Skellig is spending in fuel bills each year. And Nevis is perhaps spending 1/3, maybe 1/4 of that amount for Nevlec in fuel each year. So if you did that math over the last 20 years, you're talking not hundreds of millions, but perhaps over $1 billion that has been spent. And when you compare that to what we are told it would have costed us to develop geothermal, which could have provided baseline power for the entire country and weaned us off fossil fuels, it really, with the benefit of hindsight, made good sense for us to have pursued this a very long time ago. But we can't recreate the past, we can only consecrate the future. And I think that this is one of the efforts that I would like to see transcend the politics, that I would like to see survive whatever political changes may come from time to time. We are in a democratic process. We can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow. But I think that the ethos behind this, the thinking behind this is something that I'm hopeful will persist and will endure. Now, why am I optimistic about it? I'm optimistic about it because I think this renewable energy thrust has the potential to transform the entire country. COVID-19 taught Nevis a very harsh lesson. So dependent were we on tourism that when borders closed, Nevis shut down. And literally, we were existing on fumes insofar as the government was concerned because our major breadwinner, so to speak, was closed. And we took a decision then that whatever it took, we had to wean ourselves off that almost monopolistic situation where tourism was concerned, that we were so heavily dependent on that. St. Kitts has been equally, I think, heavily dependent on citizenship by investment. You look at our budgets each year, there's a huge chunk of that that is contributed by just one sector. I think what energy does, and I echo the sentiments expressed by Minister Maynard, because what energy, this renewable energy thrust does, it allows us now to really diversify our economy in a significant way. And I anticipate that St. Kitts and Nevis can move to an energy-based economy, a renewable energy-based economy. I have this headline already written in my head that we are the greenest place on planet Earth. I have another headline that we are the Norway of the Caribbean. But unlike Norway, our energy would be renewable energy. And I think it's achievable. It's only 2 miles of ocean between us. We're talking about a single grid. We're talking about that level of coordination. We're talking about energy that is likely to be multiple times cheaper than fossil fuel energy. A baseline energy source, a baseload energy source in geothermal that is recognized among renewable energy sources as the best baseload that you can get. And so, and Nevis, just for the audience, those who haven't been following this as closely, we are told that the scientists are saying we may have up to 1,000 megawatts, 1 gigawatt of geothermal energy. If we can harness even half of that, frankly, if we can harness even a quarter of that, it makes St. Kitts and Nevis completely energy self-sufficient. It weans us off fossil fuels in a way that other places may not be able to achieve. And supported by solar and the other efforts that are being made in terms of renewable, I think it puts us in an enviable position to really transform our economy. Now, why am I particularly excited about this? It's not just the economic transformation. It's that energy sustainability allows us to do a lot of other things. We in Nevis, look over in St. Kitts, we see you're having some water woes. The minister is under some pressure about water. We too are having some water woes because we're in a drought, and that creates difficulty. But we are surrounded by ocean. Now, why is it we're not using more in terms of desalination? The answer, the cost of energy. So getting cheaper renewable energy allows us now to tap into the ocean for potable water through that process of desalination. It allows us to do it on a much more significant scale. Our farmers, just today a farmer reached out to me and said, oh, I'm struggling because I don't have the water to deal with my crops. Water is a critical aspect to farming. I hope you see how we're ticking. People are talking about SDGs, we're ticking the boxes. So we're talking about energy, sustainability, and sufficiency. That allows us to achieve greater water sustainability and sufficiency. Water sustainability and sufficiency then leads to greater food security and sufficiency because we can now make water available in more abundance and cheaper to our farmers. And then I mentioned the economic sustainability and self-sufficiency that we need. So whereas today we wake up and we look on the news and we're trying to figure out what's going on in Iran, what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in Venezuela, what does that mean for us? Is there a deal on the war in Iran? Is the Strait of Hormuz opened or not? Imagine a St. Kitts and Nevis where we don't really, let me use my words properly, not that we don't care, but it doesn't affect us in the same way because we are self-sustained and self-sustaining. And not only that, but because of the excess energy that we hope to have, that we can now assist others in our neighborhood. Antigua has expressed a great interest. Minister Maynard is aware of that. The European Union is expressing a great interest in creating some grid, which starts in Nevis, exploiting that resource and expanding outwards. But even if we were not to supply other islands, there are now, of course, energy consumers that can provide that diversification to our economy in terms of industry, in terms of so many other things that we can do with energy. St. Kitts is a significant cruise port. The International Maritime Organization, I'm understanding, is moving to a position where ships have to transform to get some portion of their power from renewable sources. Plug and play. If we have the energy, then why not say to the cruise ships, well, you can come, you can home port now, not just for guests, but you can home port for energy. And so I think that there's so many options available to us because we are potentially energy rich. So in the old days, we looked at Saudi Arabia, we looked at Venezuela, more recently we look at Guyana, and everybody's talking about how much oil they have. I think we need to start to reorient our thinking to say, look at all this renewable energy that we potentially have that can truly be transformative. So my vision is one that's hopefully going to outlive me, but I think that my children and my grandchildren are going to benefit from a St. Kitts Nevis that is energy self-sufficient. And once we're energy self-sufficient, I listened to the comment made by the young lady who was concerned about her bill. I think that's a very legitimate concern. In Nevis now, people want to throw me out of office because I've said we can't swallow the fuel surcharge anymore. People are going to have to pay some of it. It's a big issue for people. So I think that this transition is critical on so many levels. But in order to achieve it, I go back to where Minister Maynard started, and which I think is the most fundamental component of this. There has to be the political will, and that political will has to survive any transition in government. We have to set aside certain things that are so critical to our national development that whoever is in power, that they are moving in that direction for the overall good of the citizenry of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Wow. So, folks, we see that the alignment is not merely based on matching ties, but certainly a shared vision across St. Kitts and Nevis. And Minister Brantley highlighted a few very critical considerations that are embedded within the national energy policy, interconnection being one um, of these considerations. Now, outside of the national energy policy, one thing that we have been working on to ensure that we facilitate the shared vision and that carries on into implementation is the establishment or the delivery of a concept note and framework to establish a regulator. And today we sat with technocrats, and a little to my surprise, because I didn't realize that our technocrats were so much aware and aligned with ensuring that the private sector is critically involved. And so we heard a lot of how can we ensure that a regulatory body will take care of consumer protection and compliance. So we heard that a lot today. And I think that speaks volumes around how we continue to break down silos and to take an all-in approach. And so representing the private sector is the VP, Vice President of the Chamber here in St. Kitts, Ms. Parry. My question to you, from the Chamber's perspective, what opportunities does the energy transition create for businesses, and what conditions are needed to encourage greater private sector investment and participation?
Okay, thank you, Charlene. Good evening, everyone. I wish to observe the protocol which was established earlier. Safe to recognize the presence of Honorable Congress Maynard to my left, Honorable Mark Brantley, Premier of Nevis to my right, his colleagues in the Nevis Island Administration, and if she's still present, Honorable Dr. Joel Clark. So as Charlene indicated, I am here in my capacity as the Vice President of the St. Kitts Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce. And I wish to dive straight away into my response to your question about the opportunities that the energy transition can create for business in St. Kitts, and also what conditions are needed to encourage greater private sector investment and participation. The first point I wish to make, and is the obvious one, the energy transition should reduce costs to businesses and help us to improve competitiveness. And I wish to look at that from three perspectives. Firstly, manufacturing. If you're using a lot of electricity, that's one of your biggest inputs. And if you can reduce that cost, then it means the cost of production is lower. You have more flexibility in terms of your pricing. And this becomes even more important if you're in the export field. It just gives you a lot more flexibility. And the same point comes up when we look at tourism. So St. Kitts and Nevis is not a cheap destination. Airlift is expensive, hotel rooms are costly. But if we can reduce our energy costs, for example, the hotels, and we may still have the high airlift, but we hope that the Minister of Tourism will continue to work on that. But if someone who is looking at vacationing in St. Kitts and Nevis looks at the costs of the vacation holistically, and the hotel rooms are cheaper because the hotels don't have to spend as much money on energy for cooling the rooms, etc., then we can become more competitive with other destinations. And finally, I wish to look specifically at supermarkets. One of the highest costs for supermarkets is refrigeration. If we can bring down the cost of refrigeration for supermarkets, it means that the cost of goods in the supermarket should be cheaper. We should translate into lower costs passed on to consumers. The Yes, Honorable Matt Brantley is here whispering, we hope. So, taking all of that into account, what are the optimal conditions to ensure that the private sector is fully engaged in the energy transition? Firstly, I want to place on record the thanks of the business community to the Honorable Prime Minister and his cabinet for the fiscal incentives which were announced earlier this year in relation to the installation of solar panels or solar systems for both individuals and businesses. One of the concerns that we have, though, and perhaps it can be factored into the consideration of the incentives when they expire at the end of December and thought is given to whether to renew them, is that when you give fiscal incentives, just giving fiscal incentives alone isn't sufficient. You have to take into account, especially if they're geared at the businesses, you have to take into account the fiscal cycle of the company. So if you give an incentive or if you announce it, let's say February or March in a year, many companies have their fiscal year from January 1 to December 31st. The budgeting would have been done in the previous year, in October, November, or December. It means that having set their budget for the upcoming fiscal year, there's not much bandwidth in their expenditure to take on board a capital cost like putting a rooftop solar installation. So these are things that we think need to be part of the conversation when incentives are being given. They have to be aligned to the business and its financial cycle. Secondly, in relation to incentives, um, there is some talk, nothing has been announced definitively, but there's some talk of the net metering and the rate that will be paid to persons who can give electricity back to the grid. Based on a meeting we were in recently, the number which was shared with us was either 10 or 11 cents. Doing a rough calculation without all the information, we looked at the chamber, we looked at how the charge for commercial consumers is calculated. And this, Honorable may not be completely accurate, but we're just going based on those numbers. Based on the tier system, the lowest cost per kilowatt hour is, I think it's in St. Kitts, I'm not sure what it is in Nevis, it's about 65 or 67 cents. Once you're over 250. Then that doesn't include the cost per unit for the when you apply the FBC. So when we did a rough calculation, you add, let's say, 10, 15 cents to the 67 cents, you see where we are. And you compare it to the 11 cents that you'll be getting if you sell back to the grid. We came to the conclusion at the chamber, and we're subject to correction and looking at all the models, that it doesn't make economic sense for us to build a plant which has excess capacity, which allows you to sell back to the grid if all you're getting is 11 cents. So that's a figure we feel needs to be relooked and reconsidered. Yes, and you will get your opportunity to respond. So that the first point, of course, was the reduced energy costs and the increased competitiveness. The second point in terms of opportunity is we perceive that there will be lots of opportunities for investment in whether it's geothermal or Nevis, if you use a special purpose vehicle, where businesses and individuals can use their savings, their capital, and purchase a stake or an interest in that special purpose vehicle. The same applies to the planned solar facility for which you have an RFP out right now. And gentlemen, forgive me, but I have to be frank. I'm speaking on behalf of the private sector. One of the concerns we do have about that, we are all gung-ho about investing in our country and making sure that we move forward. However, we wish to ensure that whatever vehicle, corporate vehicle is used, that it is commercially operated and that it is free from government influence and interference. We looked at the models of, for example, Grenlec, Barbados Light and Power, and Lucelec, which are completely free of government interference, and that they're run as a true commercial entity. Without going into any detail, we all know how government entities which provide services operate. You're in a 5-year election cycle. You have receivables you can't collect. Those are not, we think, appropriate considerations where you wish the public to put their money in. We want to have a corporate vehicle which operates as a true commercial entity. The other point we wish to make there is governments, unfortunately, we can't give them an A+ when it comes to running businesses like that. For example, it is my understanding through observation and through having conversations with persons that where you operate, for example, a utility, preventative maintenance is key. Ongoing repairs are also key. It's crucial that you have a store of spares, and that's a heavy expense to carry. And in addition to that, you must have persons who are locally available and who are trained to deal with issues which will come up. We can't wait for someone to fly in from overseas to address an issue. And so it's for all of those reasons that we from the private sector would prefer that if we're going to invest in these opportunities, that they are commercially viable. So that's the second point. And then the last point I wish to make in relation to the opportunities available to the private sector as we transition from an energy perspective, it's in relation to medium and small enterprises. Access to finance is an issue for many reasons for small companies, small businesses. I am hoping that, as Minister Maynard and Premier Brantley said earlier, and they used the example, for example, of Skelec paying $120 million for its fuel. With the energy transition, that bill can be reduced by 50%. That those savings which are realized can be channeled into an appropriate vehicle to provide financing to small and medium-sized enterprises, whether through concessional lending, providing credit guarantees, or any other blended finance mechanisms. That's my contribution.
Thank you, Ms. Barry, and the private sector coming in very strong.
I think she was a little hard on Congress and the federal government. You know, I think she was a little hard on you and the federal government talking about the inefficiencies. You know, she wasn't talking about Nevis.
So I want to take the opportunity. I want to thank Sanya for bringing up those points. And I probably want to start with some calypso. I never actually ever put something out first. I'm always more lethal when I have to respond. So I will respond. So starting on the last point, savings that are gained from not having to pay the fuel bill. So we need to make sure that we're clear on this. It is the consumer who is paying the fuel bill, technically. So even in the business community, if you are encouraging the government to redirect the savings to appropriate places, this is actually an ode or a comment to you, the business community, that when you do save on the fuel bill, which you are paying, that we actually are going to see the savings in whatever commodity you are selling. Because it is not the government that is going to get that saving. We are subsidizing, yes, for the residential customers, which is taking money away from things that should already be done. But the business community stands to gain significantly by a reduced electricity bill because of the fuel bill that they don't have to pay. So that note is really telling the business community that there's a responsibility that when the saving is passed on, that the customer sees it at the end of the day. In terms of the utility needing to have the capacity for spares and operational efficiencies and human capacity, let's talk about some realities. When in recent times, there were significant arrears in the sector for electricity bills. Significant. So you had businesses that were thriving, that were making money, and so on, etc. And they were very delinquent in paying the bills. Now, what does that do for a company like Skelec or Nevlec? It means that they do not have the ability to have the operational efficiency, to be able to purchase the spares, to be able to hire the experts that they need. And so there's a responsibility as well on the part of the business community and anyone who has a bill to ensure that they are paid. Skelec, I think, because it is a government-owned institution, is sometimes mistaken as a government department. And somehow that the government is going to be able to subsidize what they are doing. But they have real obligations. And so part of the responsibility for us as well is to ensure that the necessary bills are paid. Plus, the tariff that Skelec presently has, and I believe it's probably the same for Neville, has not been revived for quite some time. I do not believe that Skelec's tariff has changed for the last 14 or 15 years. So in reality, based on the true cost of energy, almost every consumer is already saving just based on the cost. And that is why this energy transition is so very important. The actual cost of energy is higher than what every consumer is paying in St. Kitts and Nevis. So here you have, one, a utility or utilities who are unable to collect. Two, they are unable to charge the right amount. And yet, the responsibility or the expectation is that they're still going to have the operational efficiencies, the ability to have spares, and the ability to roll out significant projects. Now, in terms of the 11 cents on renewable energy back into the grid, again, I'm going to take a little time on this one because perhaps I think that statement makes me, convinces me that we need to have a bit more engagement on how someone should try to benefit from the Solarized project. The idea of the Solarized project is not for businesses or residential owners, to become producers of electricity for sale. It is in order to help you to lower your electricity bill. And how do you do that? For every kilowatt hour that you produce and you self-consume, you save your tariff. So therefore, if you produce 10 kilowatt hours and you're able to use 10 kilowatt hours, your actual saving is your 70 cents per kilowatt hour. So anyone designing a system now should not be designing a system to feed the energy back into the grid. They should be designing a system that they are able to consume as much of the energy that they produce, thereby saving themselves 70 kilowatt or whatever the actual cost is, plus FBC. And then when you add FBC that the businesses have to pay now, and let's say that is add, 10 cents is added to that, so it becomes 80 cents or it becomes 90 cents. Every every kilowatt hour that you produce and you use, you're saving yourself 80 to 90 cents. You should not be thinking about sending the energy back into the grid. That is not the purpose, and I'm going to explain why that is not the purpose. So therefore, I'm going to encourage businesses that they have to look at not solar systems, but solar plus battery energy systems. So if you design a system, if your use, I'm going to just use some quick numbers, if your usage is 100 kilowatt hours in a day, and you have a solar system that can produce 100 kilowatt hours in that day, then you design a battery system that takes maybe 50 of that. You use the 50 from the solar during the day, you save 70 cents. You rely on the battery in the evening, you save 70 cents. Your objective is not to necessarily put energy back into the grid. If we are looking at the model in that way, then we're looking at the model in the wrong way. Additional to that, Skelec also has to protect what you can have as the slow erosion of the utility. The utility, unlike a producer, has the responsibility to distribute energy that it gets, whether it produces it or it gets it from someone. I was just in a place where the energy is probably could be less than 4 US or 3 US cents. The reality is, Skelec would be unwise to set an expectation that renewable energy cost is much more than that. Because in reality, solar panels right now can produce energy at around 5 US cents, which is about 13 EC cents. So if Skelec now, at this point, is going to set a tariff rate for you to put back into the grid that is higher than what renewable energy they will be able to buy in a short period of time, that would not necessarily be wise. So I think that there needs to be a conversation about the reshaping of how we ought to think about this, the renewable energy use. And then finally, on the issue of capital investment, when looking at your financial outlay and having enough time to take advantage of concessions, again, I want to proffer a different way to look at it. Your bill is, let's say, $1,000 a month that you're paying for electricity. They tell you that the system is going to cost $60,000 to put in place. You should not be thinking about just a $60,000 investment. You should be thinking about designing a system that's going to cost $60,000 that maybe you can leverage, either borrow from yourself or go to a financial institution to say, hey, give me $55,000. I'll pay you back $1,000. So instead of now paying Skelec $1,000 a month, I'm paying back the financial institution $1,000 per month. My monthly expense is not affected, but in 5 to 6 years, I have a return on my investment, and my electricity is now free. So I don't think that it would be the way to think that we need to have concessions in perpetuity because necessarily we are constrained by financial cycles. But I think that we need to be a bit more creative in ensuring that we set up our systems to take advantage of the concessions. Now, one final thing I would say on it is in terms of the stability of the grid. As an electrical engineer and an electrical computer engineer, not while I am the Minister of Energy will I allow Skelec to make decisions that is going to jeopardize the stability of our electrical grid. Barbados, for instance, started off with a lot of solar. It was a nice thing to do. And what happened? A few years ago, big crash of their energy grid. Why? Because renewable energy, for instance, solar, is still intermittent. And so in an instance, you could have 10 megawatts onto the grid, and in an instance, it's not on the grid. Electricity is actually not like water. It has to be stabilized. There are frequencies that the utility must keep, and once you have that um, quick up ramp or down ramp of the energy coming on the grid, it can destabilize. And so the reality is that there is only a certain amount of distributed renewable energy that is intermittent that SCELEC can reasonably allow on the grid. So therefore, the concessions can't go on forever to continue to encourage everybody to come on the grid in that way. So there are practical reasons why you must take it one step at a time to ensure that you're ensuring that you do not destabilize the grid in your process to do that. Now, SCELEC is doing a number of things to assist, to help in this. For instance, looking at battery, utility scale battery storage that will help to stabilize, and the fact that we're doing the 50 megawatt solar farm with 30.5 megawatt battery allows SCELEC the opportunity to help to stabilize our grid. So what I think from this is that it would be nice for the business community, for instance, to have a session to understand that there are ways to take significant advantage of the time. I am telling you, I don't have solar as yet, but I am definitely taking an opportunity now, because I can see the benefit now with the price of batteries where they are. When you look at the price of battery, when you look at the price of solar, when you look at the concessions that you're going to have by not having taxes for the next couple of months, this is something that is worth taking advantage of now, because when you do the math, I am willing to pay $1,000 to a financial institution for the next 5 years, replacing a $1,000 electricity bill, and then having free electricity thereafter.
Can I just add very briefly? I think one point that Minister Maynard didn't mention in response to Ms. Parry is the need for the utilities, both NEVLEC and SCELEC, to continue to have generating capacity that needs to be able to kick in when things like solar go down. So the minister talked about up ramp and down ramp. If, for example, a major business has X kilowatt hours of solar, and we have 2 days, 3 days of no sunlight, stormy conditions, the utility is still required to have the capacity. So when one of the big companies goes offline in terms of their solar, we have to be able to ramp up to be able to supply. So insofar as the costing of that is concerned, it's rather technical. It's beyond my capacity, but that is where I think the technical people come in. Ms. Parry raised a fundamentally important point, in my view, about ownership structure. We can talk until the cows come home. The question is always going to be there. We know that governments are not the most efficient in running businesses or private sector. So I take that criticism as being well-founded. The issue is, how do we deal with it? And I think that she used examples in St. Lucia, I think, and elsewhere, Lucilec and Grenlec. But I think that what we have been talking about, and it is not yet finalized, is a structure where we have some type of special purpose vehicle that owns, for want of a better language, a geothermal resource. We expect that geothermal will then be sold to SCELEC, will be sold to NEVLEC, because ultimately NEVLEC and SCELEC are the entities that distribute power. I think that where the possibility for ownership and participation from the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis and from the business sector is perhaps in that SPV. How do you structure that you could say to the companies, whether large, mid-sized or small companies, you can say to the mom and pop, there's an opportunity here for you to invest, to buy shares in this. We haven't yet determined that. In fact, I can say that in discussions with the Honorable Prime Minister, we have actually set up a small team from the Nevis Cabinet and from the Singits cabinet to discuss those issues to determine what vehicle can we best use to deliver this in an efficient way, in a way that is insulated from the political interference that Ms. Parry, I think, correctly identifies. And I think that that's important. Now, my brother Connery spoke about companies owing large amounts of money and them playing their part. I think I would, if I were to be the devil's advocate, which I try not to be, I would ask, well, how did those companies run up those massive bills in the first place? Because if there was a political will and this was being run as it should be run, they shouldn't have been able to run up those massive bills because they should have been cut off. And in my experience, nothing gets a bill paid as quickly as when the electricity is cut off. So that ability to call the minister, call the premier, call the prime minister and say, oh, you know, me and my whole family support you, put back on the power because so. I agree with Ms. Parry, we have to insulate the process from that if it's going to be viable, if it's going to be sensible investment for the business community. We have to have that level of independence. So I take that point. The other criticism she had of Congress, those are well-founded. That's a matter for her and him.
Charlene, not to get into a back and forth, thank you, Premier. Your response just now was one I intended to make in response to the rebuttal from Honorable Maynard. But just one, yes, rebuttal. It has become a debate, and that is what it is. But just one final comment, though, and it's in relation to fiscal incentives and your use of the word into perpetuity. So the business community is not looking for and has no expectation of fiscal incentives that go on and on forever and ever. I think there may be a disconnect in terms of understanding the nimbleness of a company with its CFO, its board of directors, and its ability to make decisions. Unfortunately, it can't operate like an individual, where decisions can be quick. An individual can go and decide, you know, I need this, let me take a loan. I have the bandwidth to qualify for a loan. With businesses, there's a lot more layers involved. And so we're not looking for a 5-year concession. We just need sufficient time to look at your budget, make the decision, pull the trigger, and have sufficient time as well, given today's issues with shipping and logistics and sourcing, getting all of that done within the time frame allowed for the concession. That's all we're asking for.
Just to acknowledge that, yes, of course. And I think it's important to make the distinction that these are added concessions. So concessions already exist. Solar panels already, renewable energy equipment already have concessions on them. So they are all duty free. So that exists already. This particular policy, at least in its first instance, is a response, a direct response to what is happening in the global sphere to ease at this moment anyone during this period who is on that path. And so those concessions already exist. And I want to, I think that I'm going to have to ask the energy unit to ensure that this has been circulated. We have also expanded the list of renewable energy items that fall under these concessions. So before time, it was very limited in scope, but now, I don't know if we've already passed that on. We've adjusted the list to include all new renewable energy equipment. So they past December of this year, renewable energy equipment will still be duty free.
All right, folks. So Minister Brantley said he did not see the fire, but this is the fire. The passion that you see here in our and very interesting banter that we intentioned. And so I do want to give you an opportunity to weigh in as well. These conversations have been extremely thought evoking, and I'm sure you have questions. I see hands being raised already. So my colleagues are going to assist with getting microphones to you.
Good evening again. And Lorenzo Jackson, Vice President of the St. Kitts Nevis Associations of Persons with Disabilities. And my first question is to Minister Maynard. The solar farms we have online right now, are any residential homes benefiting from the energy generated from these farms? And this is from a national security angle. The technology we are using right now in the power grid are what we are intending on doing with the solar energy. Are any barriers in place to stop any, illicit actors from hacking our energy grid and shutting it down? And also, is our energy grid shielded from any EMP attacks? Yeah, this one is directed to the Honorable Minister Maynard. I think this is in his wheelhouse.
Thank you very much. Very interesting questions indeed. By solar farm, I presume you don't mean solar that is on rooftops. You mean if there are any utility scale or larger scale solar farms. That's what you mean? So at present, there is, I think, only one solar farm that you can consider a solar farm, that is by the ECCB, which is presently producing electricity and going into the grid. So technically, yes, anything that is placed onto the grid will then affect consumers. So that is, I don't remember the size of it, but it's a very, very small solar farm. Truthfully, truth be told as well, when the largest solar farm that we have is actually the ECCB solar installation. And so when they produce excess energy, it goes into the grid. And again, once it's on the grid, then it can affect everyone. That's a very important question you asked about attacks. Grids can in fact be attacked. And, well, fortunately or unfortunately right now, SCELEC is in the transition to fully automate their grid. So right now, it's practically impossible for someone to shut down the entire grid just like that, simply because there are still a lot of manual processes that exist. However, we are going to get to that point where you have advanced SCADA systems that you need to ensure that you have the protection mechanisms in place. And so that is a serious consideration, and that you've asked it. I'm going to ensure that these things are considered as we build out this SCADA system. We're doing it at the government level in terms of our EID transition and digital transformation agenda. Cybersecurity is going to be, or is, a very, very critical part of that. So that is on the forefront of our minds. And in terms of an EMP attack, I don't know if my experts can advise whether or not we are prepared for such an attack. Given our small size, we would hope, first of all, that nobody would be that serious to want to do an EMP attack on our grid. I mean, I don't know what, that would be trying to do. But I don't know if we have, at this point, the capacity to shield for something like that. I don't know if my experts, right? So we don't, at the moment, have that. So keep that in our list of items on our prayer, that we don't get that type of attack.
And when we move on into the more relaxed segment of the night, we do encourage you to interact with the experts. We have the GM of both our utilities present, as well as the head of the energy transition unit with SCELEC, and I see other utility experts in the room as well. So please feel free when you network and mingle and mix to ask some of these difficult questions to really determine if they are suitable for the jobs, right? Jonathan, over to you, Sanya, with questions in the room.
Hi, Shauna Lake, member of the chamber. Just more like a comment, and this is more for your project. It's a question for your project. But first of all, I'd like to thank you for having this session to bring us up to speed in relation to the policy. I have to confess I have not had a chance to read the policy, so some of the feedback I'm getting is for the first time, and I'll have to have a look at it. But I want to thank you for that. What I would like to say is, based on a comment that was made before, and I think the Honorable Minister Maynard, and I think alluded to it as well, the fact, and also Premier Brantley, that the biggest risk we have to this policy is political will. And in the late 90s, I had done a CEDAR project in St. Lucia where we did an environmental audit of their laws, of the environmental laws, with a view to making improvements to have more environmentally friendly legislation in St. Lucia. And that was as far back as the late 90s. So there has always been talk and the desire to have us be more environmentally friendly and sustainable. I came back with ideas and I said, we should have concessions on double flush toilets and solar farms and solar panels, et cetera, like Barbados had, et cetera. But of course, we are very dependent on duty concessions, and it wasn't something that was taken on board at the time, and I guess maybe energy prices weren't that high. But the challenge I would give to yourselves as a project is to ensure that we mitigate against the risk of the lack of political will, in terms of changes, if you do have any changes of political parties. And what I would challenge you to do, education, but I would challenge you all to perhaps invite all political parties to the fore, challenge them to have discussions, debates, and educational campaigns on this so everybody takes it on board. Because the reality is, we want to have sustainability with our electrical grid. We need to be sustainable as a people. And unfortunately, we are our own worst enemies. And I see it too many times. And just like what you've said, you have changes in political parties. I have seen situations where one political party was trying to do something to save water, the government changes, and then that goes out the door because of lack of trust or just because, I see too many situations where a policy that's great when one government is in power, the same policy that was being cursed by an opposition person becomes wonderful as soon as they get into power. And so we are our own worst enemies. So I think part of this project, in fact, a critical part of this project, has to be education, and at every level. Whether we go into the schools, we have to do campaigning in the schools, the businesses, amongst political parties, on the radio, social media. We have to get the message out there. So this conversation was very enlightening. All points made by everybody on the panel, and congratulations to the panel. I think everybody gave us a lot of food for thought and very, very important facts that we didn't even hear about because we hear too much noise. So I really would encourage the project to do more in terms of education. The policy as well, I haven't seen it, so I can't critique it, but maybe do a frequently asked questions, maybe make it simple. People don't like to read. I worked for government for 15 years. If it goes past 2 pages, nobody's gonna read it. Sorry, ministers, but that's the reality. Nobody has time to read a 30-page report. So you gotta get it down into bite-sized pieces with the punchline. So if I could just challenge you to do that, to make it as consumable as possible for us.
Thank you so much. And challenge accepted. In fact, we are here this evening because when we started thinking of how do we take the national energy policy to the public, I just did not want to be part of sitting in a room with our consultant, with a PowerPoint presentation, just dishing out information and hoping that it would have spark some interest. And so I think this very conversation is just a start of socializing that national energy policy. And I do encourage you. So what we have done, though, is we have created executive summaries that are shorter read. So I would encourage you to at least have a look at the executive summaries in terms of the political continuity that is coming out very strongly. As I said, this week we had several consultations and workshops, and it was one of the major risks that were brought forward. One of our outputs, in addition, so we've spoken a lot about a national energy policy, but I must mention the FEEC, and that is Federal Energy and Energy Efficiency Commission, which is a concept note, and it's really just us framing what would an independent body that will regulate the energy sector look like across both St. Kitts and Nevis that is in a sense insulated from political interference at the turn of a government, of an administration. So the FEEC concept, I think, tries to target that risk or try to mitigate that risk. And then our next steps would be the legislative work, and Miss Ale, who is our MC tonight, is going to lead that work. And so that is where we expect to really put up the shields that will ensure that legacy of the national energy policy and regulatory body.
If I may add something to that, in terms of the political will, it is absolutely very important also to strike the iron while it's hot, because the political will exists now, and so the challenge I'm extending from Mrs. Lake is for a project like this, that time is always of the essence, not projecting anything in the future, but while you have the iron hot strike, meaning design it in such a way that while you have the political will, you can get it stamped and sealed and delivered, and it's done, because the commitment is there. Right now, we do not have a regulator in St. Kitts, but I tell Skelec, who I have responsibility for, that I'm not going to be a rubber stamp for them. So when they brought this particular policy, for instance, with the 11 cents, etc., and they made their case as to why it needs to be this and so on, etc., up until the last minute, they would have thought that I was going to insist that the government must carry it up higher. And I told them that they have to go. We asked a couple of people to look at it. We asked SICRI to look at it. We asked an independent energy practitioner who I happened to meet at an energy conference someplace. I said, have a look at this. So even without the regulator present, they went through a vigorous process to come to this point. However, this may not exist all the time. May not exist all the time. And I am committed to seeing this particular project through. I want to see a regulator. I want to see that it is independent. I know that it's going to be better for the country. I want it to be insulated and I want it to be well structured so that regardless of what happens, they will make the right decisions going forward. So there is strong, strong, strong support for the insulation of the bodies that are going to make this decision. And Skelec is right there. I, as much as I'm responsible for an energy unit, say again, a NEVLEC, yes. An energy unit as well would tell you the amount of immense pressure that I put because I am aware that there's no regulator there. But we need to make sure that it is there so that I don't have to extend that kind of energy to keep these folks in line.
Hi, good evening. Tara Hendrickson. I have two questions. One, what are we doing to assist the workforce in the transition, moving away from fossil fuels to obviously the energy saving initiatives? What are we doing to assist that? Because obviously we have a workforce that's, used to the manual labor of, ensuring that the equipment is turning over. Are we transitioning them to a more energy efficient job? Because obviously some jobs are going to be lost along the line. Is there a process? Are we transitioning that particular workforce into those new roles? And also, the second question is, once we've made that transition, obviously the equipment, the batteries, over time, wear and tear, those particular equipment is going to end up in the landfill. Is there a plan from the solid waste side in terms of disposing of those particular batteries, that equipment that goes along with that clean energy? Is there a plan for that disposal properly?
I will address the workforce question, and that forms a critical part of the policy. I'm not sure, Dylan, is that in the current version of the policy, or will that be one of the updates? And while he makes his way to the mic, one of my recommendations coming out of this week's consultations is not just looking at workforce and the schools, but a more systemic change approach to it in establishing career pathways. And I feel strongly about it because sometimes we put a lot of focus on, let's do a training, and I absolutely hate one-off trainings. I think if we're talking about workforce, we need to move towards thinking about building capacity. And I use the example of the utilities. So, Skelec made the joke that they now have to be lawyers and they have to be project managers with the 50 megawatt. So right now, what we need to be thinking about is multidisciplinary roles, but we need to map that out. And we stand to disadvantage a good intention if we put our focus only on the supply side. So we talk about going into the schools and doing this and bringing in energy and energy efficiency, and that's all good, but the demand side is extremely important. And out of that conversation this week, Mr. Pemberton, his hair was a huge champion of how are we creating, we talk about job creation, but how are we enabling industries around geothermal? It's not only about electricity generation, but how are you creating industries that would then create jobs? And how do you map that to ensure that on the supply side, you are meeting the right demand? So point very, very well taken. And it's either has already been or will be included in the policy, but from the framing of career pathways. Dylan, you wanted to add anything?
Yes, it's quite honestly a great question because just 2 days ago, Tuesday, we were discussing how can we sustain this momentum in transition. Since these targets are ambitious, 100% renewable of the energy grid, it means that each investment in physical capital requires an equal push to upskill the workforce to ensure more of the benefits are localized, which means, one, creating procurement opportunities for our SMEs and other businesses, which also means that those businesses and workers will have to be certified and upskilled in tandem, right? And that's how you sustain. I want to use the word local content and industrial policies because, again, since energy is basically the backbone, the foundation of any economic base, then policies around how do you localize those effects, especially with human capital resources, becomes equally important. So I want to tee up Minister Maynard and the Premier for more insights on that push.
So let me just very suggestion that we're going to lose jobs. I actually think that we're going to have different jobs. I think that's the way we need to look at it. And I'm reminded that there was a point in St. Kitts when there was a sugar industry. And many people predicted that when it closed, the whole St. Kitts would collapse because what are these people going to do? I think sometimes we underestimate the capacity of our people to adapt. And whilst we're talking about the utilities and the utilities having, of course, to upskill and upgrade, I think what we're likely to see are different jobs emerging. So are we going to have data centers? Are we going to have, power to X, as we have heard earlier? And what does that look like? So I think that there's a huge potential, not necessarily to lose jobs, but to have different jobs created in the economy. And frankly, I think perhaps better paying jobs, opportunities for our young people who are looking to come back and to work in this particular sector. So I am not one to look at this in a pessimistic way. I feel sometimes change is change. That's the nature of change. It brings new challenges, but it also brings new opportunities. And I would rather see this as an opportunity for us to transform our economy, to move away from what we now know, and frankly, to make it more future ready. And so I see this as a huge opportunity for us to reskill, yes, but also to introduce new ideas and new skills, and frankly, to think about our economy and our country in a different way.
Just to add to that, I I actually want to go a step further, Premier. I think that the energy transition is going to create new jobs, not just transition existing jobs. They're going to be new jobs because the green energy sector, just by its nature, is a job creating sector. And so I expect that the transition is going to create new jobs. In fact, when we do this solar farm, we will not have some of the jobs required to build it out in the first place. And so we have to create those new jobs. Additionally, I want to commend, I think this gentleman is from GSI. GSI has partnered with, I think, the technical vocational arm of CFBC to provide training, and they've done a number of training already with respect to solar and EV vehicles, etc., and those will continue. So this reskilling and retooling has already happened or has already started, and I think there are others that my team probably can give some more, put some more meat on. But I think that this is really, I want to concur with the Premier, this is an excellent opportunity to not only reskill, retool ourselves, but create new jobs in this energy sector. And the, you know, let me leave it there. Yes.
Okay. Good evening, I guess.
Right, the batteries. Sorry, before you continue, my apologies. Within our vehicle policy, electric vehicle policy, we have already tried to address the situation with batteries. In the first instance, if my memory serves me right, whoever produces or whoever procures or sells the battery has a responsibility to be able to take back that battery at present. So any dealer, etc., when they're about to, or when they have decided that they're going to be selling particular electric vehicles, they are actually responsible for the disposal of the batteries. However, it's not going to stop there. We anticipate that the uptick rate of electric vehicles is going to be 2-3% the most in the very beginning. So we have some time, or it is within, we have some time to fine-tune that policy. And it was not necessary to get that absolutely right before you start, just because there's going to be a relatively slow pace of adoption with that. But that is in the forefront of the policy, at least at the energy units level with the vehicle policy. And I'm pretty sure that it is part of the consideration of this decarbonization project as well.
Okay, yeah. Minister Maynard, I keep hearing talk about 50 megawatt solar farm. Considering how much lands these solar farms, I did a quick Google search of approximately how much land a solar farm of that size should use. And it's somewhere around 100 acres if Google is correct. And so my question would be, because I've read some articles about them using these lands like for dual purposes, where they raise the panels so that like maybe sheep or something can graze underneath, or you can grow crops that can grow in the shade under the panel. So I'm asking if there's would be any consideration into doing something like this with this large-scale solar farm because of the amount of land that is being used, so that we don't have land just sitting there where, yes, we're generating the electricity, yes, we're trying to go green, but if we can use the land for more than just that purpose, is there any consideration to do something like that?
Thank you. That's a very, very good question, very insightful question. For this particular project, I'm not entirely sure, but yes, it's over 100 acres of land. But I want to start where, first of all, where that land is. In the history of the existence of St. Kitts and Nevis, the land where the solar farm is going to be, which is the Bassa Valley Aquifer, there has been effectively nothing done with the land except to preserve it because it sits right on top of our aquifer. So this land was already protected. But what this gives us an opportunity is, while it's protected, while we can't build anything on it, while we can't do any large-scale farming with chemicals and so on it, it gives us this opportunity to use it for a solar farm. So we are getting, obviously, an increased benefit from some land which we couldn't do anything on it before. That's one position. Second position is the raising of the solar farms to facilitate farming, etc., underneath. Now, I have actually had the opportunity to visit some of these installations. I visited one in the, it's in Hawaii? Yes, in Hawaii, where we see that it is still an ongoing development that is not necessarily proven on a large scale for us to reach to that point for us, and especially where it is. And also acknowledging that when we look at the plan, the overall national plan, I think the minister is not here anymore, that area was not necessarily identified for that type of farming, if my research is right. And that there are other areas which the Sustainable Development has said, these areas are our preferred areas for farming, and we would prefer that you don't put solar installations there. So this bit of land, you are right, it's going to take a significant amount of land. But it is probably the most ideal piece of land that you can have for a solar farm on St. Kitts. It is flat. It is close to Skelec, meaning it's close to the distribution center. So you don't have to evacuate the power from that farm from very far. And it is land that was protected and had sat idle for quite some time. Actually turns out to be quite a more positive than negative situation. But I want to thank you for that very insightful question. That's an important question, and it was considered about doing that. Also limitations as you raise solar panels, the challenge of structures for hurricane survivability, etc. So we would also want to make that consideration. Once you do that, it then increases the cost tremendously. And then you have to determine whether raising the costs to do farming, if the economics make sense as well. Because the structures now have to be significantly engineered differently to facilitate something like that. But those considerations were made.
Now, folks, I know we could be here all night speaking very passionately about energy, and I'm loving the questions. That was an excellent question. I think we will take our last question before and I just wanted to acknowledge that we are streaming live, I believe, but once we end the panel, I would just advise that we end our live streaming and we proceed with the last bit of the evening.
Good evening. I have one last question indeed for the panel and for the technocrats. My name is Atwell Ray. I'm from St. Martin. I'm a nephew of the late Macmillan Hodge, Dr. Macmillan Hodge here in St. Kitts. I was born here in St. Kitts, actually, and I lived all my life in St. Martin, studied Holland. And one of the things that I've done is act as a policy advisor for government in St. Martin in the area of aviation. I'll see our good friend, Mr. Mark Bradley, Premier of Nevis here. I was particularly pointed out to this session because I'm staying here coincidentally in the Marriott Hotel this weekend. And indeed, the question I want to pose for the panel and for the technocrats is something that we're looking at also in St. Martin, because energy production in St. Martin is a big issue. We have our company, utility company, NVGB, having multiple issues. They've also been hacked. Good question about protection of the grid and the network. GB was hacked in St. Martin in 2024, and we're still suffering the consequence of that hack. Our system was totally down, and there are multiple issues with the invoicing and homes now not able to pay their bills now that they're getting invoiced again. So I appreciate the panel for taking the initiative and being proactive in terms of policy determination for energy production going forward in the future. And I think one thing, maybe I haven't heard that word mentioned no time in this session, but the word hydrogen comes to mind because I have friends here online who are following the debate, and they're pushing me to ask the question if hydrogen energy has been considered here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Geothermal being something for Nevis, but geothermal, hydrogen in general, the Dutch government is pushing that agenda in the Dutch Caribbean, where St. Martin and Ruben Curaçao is concerned. And I'm very much curious what is the thoughts on hydrogen production in St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you.
First of all, brother, if you were born in St. Kitts, you're from St. Kitts. You should lead with that, not saying you're from St. Martin. Thanks for coming, and it's good to see you. The issue of hydrogen, I think, having attended some of these events over the years, we get a lot of optionality. What can we do? Because we're in a position, or potentially will be in a position, of having excess energy. So there's, of course, just the strict energy. Export it to St. Martin and to Sabre, Statia, St. Kitts, and everywhere else. Or to utilize that energy for things like green hydrogen, green ammonia. There are all these suggestions and recommendations. I could tell you my perspective is not to rule anything out, but to be pragmatic and practical about what we do. And so I have not really entertained the discussions about where we can be 20 years from now. What I'm focused on is making sure that that single mother in Jessup's village can get relief on her electricity bill because she now has a cheaper renewable source. That single mother in Keon can do the same. I think that we have to approach this in an incremental fashion. I have had suggestions made to me about mega data centers. You know, somebody sent a beautiful proposal the other day about some offshore data center built in the sea. And it all gives us optionality, to go back to the word I used earlier. But I think that we need to approach this in a practical and pragmatic way. And for me, my first obligation is to ensure that the people benefit from this resource. Because at the end of the day, it's their resource, and they should get the benefit of it reflected in cleaner, cheaper energy. And that is why I went down the line of ticking the boxes about cheaper energy, solving our water problem, they get that. Solving our food problem, they get that. Creating new jobs, different jobs in the economy, economic expansion. I think ideas such as hydrogen, ammonia, and a host of other ideas are, at this stage for me, aspirational. These are things that perhaps we can do in time, but I think that the current circumstance of volatility in terms of fuel prices around the world, the knock-on effect that has on the cost of living to our people, keeping the lights on. You've heard, I think, Sonia talk about supermarkets, hotel sector, they complain bitterly about the cost of electricity. I just feel that we need to solve that problem first as a practical consideration before we then start to look at other aspirations such as hydrogen. So to your colleagues online, tell them we're not ruling it out. We just think that sequentially it is more important to ensure that that single mother that I spoke about has cleaner, cheaper energy so that quality of her life can be better.
Right. Wow. A wonderful conversation. Okay, just one more. The last one. We really have to make this short because our colleagues from Nevis have to get onto a boat as well.
The conversation with the Ministry of Environment and the engagements and consultations. My former ED, Andrew, is over here seated at the table, and he was my right hand at the time. And between the Ministry of Environment at the time and ourselves, there was a lot of consultation and discussions with the ministry. We had a lot of time on our hands because it was COVID. But I just wanted to say, when you speak about political will, it's really heartwarming to sit here today and see a few years later this come to fruition, this legislation, this discussion for our people, for the community, business and residential. And I believe if you have a watertight system in place, literally, in terms of an energy policy, then that would just protect anything going awry in the future in terms of any political changes that could come. So thank you very much. I think this is really a positive note, and we also always hear the negative. So I just wanted to stand and say, this is really good news for St. Kitts and Nevis, and I hope that I will be one of the first to put in solar. I'm going to try and make that deadline by December if I can. So thank you.
Can I just say before we end that the best way to preserve a good thing politically is to ensure that you have the same politicians in position.
Thank you for the endorsements.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, a great note to end. Please join me in thanking our three honorable panelists. And to those watching from their living rooms, joining us this evening, and we hope to continue this dialogue. At this point, do I hand over to you, Sanya, who give instructions on the part where we mingle, and we do invite you to continue the conversations. Thank you.
So thank you once again. Can we just have a round of applause for our entire panel? I think I wish to invite the panel to return to their seats.